Daniel Mercer was 44 years old when he woke up in the ICU and realized his wife was not praying for his recovery. She was waiting for him to die. The machines around him hummed and clicked in a steady rhythm, soft enough to sound harmless, sharp enough to remind him that every breath was being counted by something other than his own body. His eyelids felt glued shut. His limbs were heavy, numb, distant. He could not move. He could barely even swallow. But his mind was awake, bright and panicked inside the prison of a broken body. At first, he thought the voice near his bed was a nurse, soft, controlled, female. Then the scent reached him before the words did. White jasmine perfume. Elise. His wife leaned close enough that he could feel the warmth of her breath against his ear. And then she whispered, in a tone so calm it made his blood turn cold. 2 more days, Daniel. That's all I need. If your next scan looks bad, the temporary control order becomes permanent, and everything rolls to me. A pause. Her fingers brushed the side of his face in a mockery of affection. You always were so careful, so organized, so impossible to beat in a straight fight. Good thing I never planned to fight fair. Inside his mind, something ripped open. His heart wanted to hammer, his muscles wanted to jerk, his throat wanted to scream. But years of building a business from storm debris, bankruptcy threats, insurance battles, and men who smiled while trying to undercut him had taught Daniel one lesson better than any other. The first person to move in a bad situation was usually the first person to lose. So he stayed still. He let the machines breathe around him. He let his wife think he was gone. Elise gave a tiny laugh, almost fond. You know what's funny? Everybody always said you could read people, that you had instincts, that nobody got anything past Daniel Mercer. She shifted in the chair beside him. And yet, you married me. Daniel forced himself to stay limp. A phone vibrated. He heard fabric rustle. A heel clicked against the floor. Then Elise's voice dropped into a different register. Warmer, more intimate, less performed. Hey, she murmured. No, I'm with him. He still hasn't woken up. A silence. Then, relax. Ryan is handling the board. By the time Daniel is officially declared cognitively unfit, no one will be able to stop us. Ryan. The name hit him harder than the pain in his ribs. Ryan Sloan was his business partner, his COO, his closest friend for nearly a decade. The voice on the other end said something Daniel couldn't hear. Elise answered with a smile in her tone. Yes, I know the payout clears after the medical review. I already checked the policy. The company trust, the insurance, the house, the accounts, we covered every angle. Another pause. No, he can't hear me. He's practically a body hooked to wires. Daniel felt a tidal wave of rage rise in him so strong he almost lost control of his breathing. But still, he stayed quiet. Still, he listened. Still, he learned. The door opened and closed. Elise shifted back into her public voice just before someone else entered the room. Doctor, I'm just so worried, she said. And if Daniel had not heard the truth 2 seconds earlier, he might have believed her. He's my whole world. His whole world. That was a lie she wore like jewelry. Daniel Mercer had spent 23 years building Mercer Restoration Group. One storm season, one flooded neighborhood, one burned-out shell of a family home at a time. He had started with a borrowed pickup truck, a wet vac, and 3 employees willing to work weekends in Houston heat after everybody else had gone home. He built his company not because he had some grand dream of becoming wealthy, but because at 21, after Hurricane Allison wrecked the apartment complex his mother managed and left the family with almost nothing, Daniel learned what desperation smelled like. Mold, bleach, wet carpet, fear. He also learned what people did when they thought nobody important was watching. Landlords delayed repairs. Insurers buried claims. Contractors took deposits and vanished. Daniel had promised himself back then that if he ever built something, he would build it right. Years later, Mercer Restoration Group had crews across Texas and Louisiana. Fire recovery, flood mitigation, commercial rebuilds, emergency housing coordination. The company did not just repair structures. It put lives back together when everything smelled like ruin. People trusted Daniel because he showed up in boots, not in slogans. Because he knew the name of the warehouse foreman and the receptionist. Because he had worked every ugly job himself before he ever gave orders to someone else. And for 5 years, he had believed Elise loved that about him. She had entered his life at a charity benefit with elegant posture, intelligent eyes, and a story about being tired of shallow people. She said she admired how real he was, how grounded, how solid. She said men like him were rare. Now, motionless in an ICU bed, Daniel understood the truth. She had not fallen in love with his strength. She had studied it, and she had built a way around it. If you like story, press subscribe button and like, comment. The accident happened on a Thursday afternoon, though in Daniel's memory it came back in broken pieces, like glass glinting under dirty water. He had been at one of Mercer's new storage and equipment facilities on the east side of Houston. The warehouse was nearly complete. Clean lines, high ceilings, fresh paint, and that chemical smell new buildings always carried before they started belonging to real people. Ryan had called that morning, insisting Daniel come by in person to review final readiness before a major insurance contract inspection the following week. "Just one quick walkthrough," Ryan had said over the phone. "There are some code questions from the subcontractor, and I'd rather answer them now than let them blow up later." Daniel almost didn't go. He had a lunch scheduled with his sister Naomi, who had been asking him for weeks to review some estate documents she thought looked too broad in Elise's favor. Naomi was a corporate attorney and did not trust vague language. Daniel had laughed it off. "Elise isn't after my truck and my favorite coffee mug, Naomi." "That's not what I said," she had replied. He remembered that now with a sick, inward twist. At the warehouse, Ryan greeted him with his usual easy grin, sleeves rolled up, tablet in hand, looking like the same capable right-hand man Daniel had depended on for years. They walked the facility together. Daniel checked emergency access points, generator backup panels, ventilation routing. He noticed a sharp solvent smell, stronger than it should have been near the rear service corridor. "What's that?" he asked. Ryan glanced over. "Probably left over from the flooring sealant. Crew said it would clear out by tomorrow." Daniel frowned. "Get that checked. Strong chemical smells in an enclosed space are not something we ignore." Ryan raised both hands in a playful surrender. "You got it, boss." A technician named Leo came jogging in from the loading dock, face pale. "Mr. Mercer, one of the pressure alarms in the suppression room keeps flickering. We reset it twice." Daniel turned immediately. "Show me." The room was narrow, lined with controls and tanks, bright overhead lights reflecting off polished metal. Daniel stepped inside first. And then, a spark, a flash like the whole room inhaled fire. A roar so violent it seemed to hit him from every direction at once. Heat slammed into his chest, the floor disappeared, metal screamed, glass burst. Something struck the side of his head. He remembered being airborne for one terrible, weightless second, and then pain. Crushing, white, total pain. After that came fragments. Sirens, smoke, hands pressing against him, someone shouting for a trauma helicopter. Elise's perfume in the emergency room. Her voice cracking perfectly as she told a doctor, "Please save my husband." Performance, all of it. Now Daniel lay in ICU, hearing the role she played for everyone else and the truth she saved for when doors closed. Over the next several hours, he learned just how careful she had been. Doctors came in and out, discussing swelling, lung trauma, burns, broken ribs, a concussion severe enough to justify sedation. Daniel listened to every word. Elise asked polished, strategic questions. Not the questions of a terrified wife, the questions of someone following a checklist. If he wakes up disoriented, how do you assess competency? How soon can legal paperwork be handled in cases like this? What if recovery is partial? Nobody seemed alarmed. She hid her hunger under concern. That night she returned alone. "You almost ruined everything by surviving the blast," she said quietly. Daniel stayed still. "But Ryan says the damage may still work in our favor. If you wake up confused, we can use that. If not—" A pause. "Well, recovery can be unpredictable." Her phone buzzed again. This time she did not leave the room. "Talk," she whispered. Ryan's voice came faintly through the speaker. Daniel could not make out every word, but he heard enough. "Board already nervous. Cash flow issue looks worse with the vendor transfers. Once she signs as acting authority." "Vendor transfers?" Daniel locked the phrase into memory. Elise gave a low laugh. "You always know how to make a mess look official." Ryan answered something that made her voice turn silkier. "Stop. Not here." There was intimacy there. Private shorthand. Familiarity. Daniel felt physically sick. His wife and his business partner were not just plotting around him. They were together. By morning, he had made 3 decisions. First, he would not let either of them know he was conscious. Second, he would recover in silence until he understood the full shape of the trap. Third, once he moved, he would move with proof. Because if Elise and Ryan had done what he now suspected, fraud, sabotage, attempted murder, they would not panic like amateurs. They would adapt. And Daniel Mercer had no intention of surviving the blast only to lose the war. The next day he began testing his body. Not much at first. A fingertip, a toe, a slight tightening in his jaw. Every movement felt like dragging himself through wet cement. Pain flared under the bandages on his shoulder. Fire ran along his ribs when he tried to breathe too deeply. But sensation was returning. Slowly, unevenly. He practiced when nobody was close enough to notice. By afternoon, his younger brother Luke came in. Luke Mercer was 3 years younger, sharp-eyed, restless, and impossible to fool. He ran a cybersecurity firm in Austin, and had spent most of his adult life alternating between hacking into protected systems for paying clients and lecturing Daniel about digital vulnerability. "If you ever let someone else handle your account permissions without oversight," Luke used to say, "you deserve whatever disaster lands on you." Normally, Daniel rolled his eyes. Now, he clung to the sound of Luke's voice like a life raft. "Hey, big brother," Luke said softly, pulling a chair near the bed. "You look terrible." That would have made Daniel smile any other day. Luke continued talking, likely assuming Daniel might hear him in some half-dream state. He mentioned Naomi arriving later. He mentioned company staff asking questions Ryan was fielding. He mentioned Elise never leaving the hospital floor unless she was on a very important call. Good, Daniel thought. Talk. Keep talking. Luke reached for his hand. Daniel gathered every ounce of strength he had and flexed one finger. Luke froze. For one dangerous second, silence filled the room. Then Luke said, louder, with exaggerated calm, "Yeah, they said your numbers are better today. That's good. Really good." His grip tightened around Daniel's hand, hard enough to say, "I know." Daniel tried again. One squeeze, then another. Luke leaned closer, still facing the room as if nothing unusual had happened. "If you can hear me," he said in a tone that could easily pass as emotional rambling. "Squeeze once for yes." Daniel squeezed. Luke inhaled sharply through his nose, controlled it fast, then said, "Okay, don't do anything else. Naomi's coming. Just hold on." That evening, Naomi arrived. Naomi Mercer never entered a room halfway. Even in jeans and a rumpled blazer after what was clearly a full day at court, she carried herself like every lie within 50 feet was about to be cross-examined. She spoke to Elise first in the hallway. Daniel heard enough to tell the conversation was tense. "Elise, I need copies of all paperwork signed since Daniel's hospitalization." "Why would you need that? I'm his wife." "Because I asked." The sweetness in Elise's reply hardened. "Now isn't the time for legal hostility." Naomi's voice stayed cool. "That depends entirely on what you filed." A few minutes later, Naomi entered Daniel's room alone. She stepped to his bedside, touched his arm lightly, and said in a warm, performative tone for the benefit of any cameras or passing staff, "Your niece drew you a picture. It's awful. She got your hairline wrong." Then, under her breath, "If you're awake, squeeze." Daniel squeezed. Naomi didn't flinch. That was one of the things Daniel loved most about his sister. She could receive catastrophe and turn it into procedure in under 3 seconds. "Good," she whispered. "Do not react. Luke told me." Her voice remained light and conversational out loud. "You always hated hospitals. Remember when Mom made you visit Uncle Ray after his surgery and you passed out before he did?" Then quieter, "Elise filed emergency authority papers this morning. Temporary medical and financial oversight due to possible incapacity. Ryan submitted supporting statements from the company claiming operational instability." Daniel's fingers twitched. Naomi pressed his hand down gently. "Don't. Listen." Out loud again, she chuckled. "You were so dramatic." Then quiet. "There's more. She attached an amendment to your family trust, supposedly signed 3 months ago. It gives her control over your voting shares if you're incapacitated for more than 72 hours. Daniel's mind went cold and clear. He had never signed such a thing. Naomi must have seen it in his eyes. "Exactly," she whispered. "I didn't think so either." When a nurse entered, Naomi smoothly transitioned into affectionate sister mode. She held up her phone as if showing Daniel family photos, laughed about childhood stories, and did not once reveal that a legal war had already begun around his bed. After she left, Daniel stared into the darkness behind his closed eyelids and built the structure of what came next. Elise and Ryan had financial motive. They had legal positioning. They had likely forged documents. And whatever happened in that warehouse was no accident. He needed evidence. Not suspicion. Not instinct. Evidence. On the 3rd morning, the medical team reduced his sedation further. Daniel made a decision. When he opened his eyes, he would not return as himself. He would return as someone Elise and Ryan thought they could control. So when Dr. Patel leaned over him and said, "Daniel, if you can hear me, open your eyes." Daniel let his eyelids flutter. He let his gaze drift unfocused across the room. He let confusion pool into his expression. Elise gasped with Oscar-worthy relief. "Oh my God, Daniel, baby." He turned his head toward her slowly, as if the effort confused him. "Elise?" he whispered. Dr. Patel smiled. "That's right. You're in intensive care. You were in an explosion, but you're safe now." Daniel frowned like a man trying to fit words together through fog. "Explosion?" He saw the relief in Elise's face. Not relief that he lived. Relief that he looked damaged. The neurological testing began. What year is it? Who is the current president? Can you tell me where you are? Can you count backward? Daniel answered enough to seem functional, failed enough to seem unreliable. A head injury patient with patchy confusion. A recovering man with impaired short-term processing. Not incapacitated beyond hope, but vulnerable. Exactly what Elise needed. Exactly what Daniel wanted her to believe. Over the next 2 days, he perfected the role. He asked the same question twice, pretended to lose track of names, reached for water with a slight tremor in his hand, looked to Elise before answering difficult questions, as if depending on her. She took the bait immediately. Her confidence grew visible by the hour. She began speaking more freely in front of him, the way careless people do when they have decided someone is no longer a threat. Ryan visited on the second afternoon. Daniel had not seen him yet since the accident, and the moment their eyes met, Daniel understood something sickening. Ryan was nervous, but not guilty enough to stay away. He actually believed he could stand beside Daniel's bed and act concerned. "Man," Ryan said, pulling up a chair, "you gave us all a scare." Daniel blinked slowly, then offered a weak half-smile. "Sorry. Guess I'm hard to get rid of." Ryan laughed too fast. Elise set a hand on Daniel's shoulder. "He's still confused sometimes." Ryan looked almost grateful. "That's okay. No pressure. Just focus on healing. I'm keeping everything afloat." Everything afloat. Daniel wondered how much of his company Ryan had already started stealing under that phrase. That evening, Luke returned with a tablet and a charger, making a show of helping Daniel relearn some basic phone functions. "You still use the same passcode?" Luke asked casually. Daniel gave him a deliberately sluggish answer, just enough to hide what was really happening. When Elise stepped out to take a call, Luke moved fast. His fingers flew over the phone screen. "I installed an encrypted recorder app," he murmured. "Voice activated. Hidden. Also mirrored backups. If they talk near this room, I want it." Daniel nodded slightly. Luke kept talking in a louder, cheerful tone. "And here's your music app, because apparently you still listen to songs from 2004 like a divorced mechanic." Daniel almost laughed. Almost. Naomi came later with a legal pad and the expression of a woman building a case brick by brick. She updated him in fragments whenever they were alone. The trust amendment was fake. A forensic handwriting expert she trusted had already told her the signature did not match Daniel's natural pressure pattern or stroke angle. A new life insurance rider had been added 8 months earlier, naming Elise as enhanced beneficiary and increasing the accidental death payout dramatically. The filing originated from an online portal Daniel had never personally used. "And Ryan?" Daniel whispered. Naomi's jaw tightened. "I'm getting there." They brought in someone else on the 4th day. Marta Ruiz. Marta had been with Mercer Restoration for 16 years. She started as a scheduling assistant when the company had one office and a leaky roof. She now ran finance and operations with the quiet efficiency of someone who did not waste words because she was too busy keeping other people's chaos from becoming fatal. If Daniel trusted anybody with the bones of his business, it was Marta. When she stepped into the room carrying a paper bag of coffee and a bouquet no one had asked for, she looked like an ordinary employee coming to visit her injured boss. When Elise excused herself to give them a moment, Marta's expression changed. "We have a problem," she said softly. Daniel looked at her. "Several, actually." She set the coffee down. "Ryan's been pushing through vendor approvals without my standard review. He said you authorized temporary flexibility before the accident. At first it looked like emergency spending. Then I dug." "How bad?" "Over 600,000 in suspicious transfers over the last 14 months. Shell vendors, duplicate invoices, inflated equipment rentals, some tied to storm response jobs that never existed." Daniel stared at her. Marta continued. I didn't confront him because I didn't know who else was involved. Then Naomi called. He looked toward the hallway, making sure Elise was still gone. Can you prove it? Marta's face hardened. I can prove enough to bury him. Daniel closed his eyes for a moment. There it was. Motive solidifying into structure. Ryan wasn't just sleeping with Daniel's wife. He was draining Daniel's company while preparing to seize control of what remained. When Elise returned, Daniel looked tired and mildly disoriented. Marta complimented the hospital coffee like it wasn't criminal, squeezed his arm, and left. That night, the recorder on Daniel's phone captured its first gift. He was pretending to sleep when Elise stood near the window and took a call. I'm telling you, he's not all there, she whispered. He remembers pieces, but Dr. Patel says post-traumatic confusion can last weeks. A pause. Then, no, not yet. If we push too hard, Naomi will get suspicious. She already is. More silence. Then Elise sighed. I know you want the board vote soon, Ryan. But if he signs while looking this impaired, it could be challenged later. We need him weak, not dead on paper stupid. Daniel lay still and listened to his own murder being managed like a paperwork issue. Then Ryan said something that made Elise's tone sharpen. I said stop talking like that over the phone. I know the blast should have finished it, but it didn't. The blast should have finished it. There it was. Not an accident. A failed attempt. Daniel waited until after midnight before sending Luke a one-line text through the mirrored app. Warehouse explosion was deliberate. Pull facility logs. The next morning, Luke arrived with no expression at all, which was how Daniel knew the news was bad. The two brothers talked while pretending to scroll sports headlines. The fire suppression alert that brought you into the back room? Luke murmured. It was triggered manually from a maintenance account created 2 days before the explosion. Daniel stared at the screen but saw none of it. Temporary account? Yeah. Traceable? Luke gave a grim little smile. Not to a genius. He pulled up a photo hidden behind a football article. Security footage stills. Ryan entering the facility after hours the night before the blast. A second figure with a hat and mask. A car registered to Elise parked outside 20 minutes later. Daniel's throat tightened. Luke kept going. Gas sensor logs were disabled, ventilation override blocked, and the suppression room door had been marked as the source of the false pressure error. They wanted me in there. Yes. Daniel looked away before the force of it showed on his face. Luke leaned closer. There's more. Naomi asked me to run Elise deeper than a normal background check. Daniel waited. She's not who she says she is. Daniel turned back. Luke swiped to another file. A different driver's license photo. Different hair. Different last name. Her current identity is clean for about 7 years. Before that, there's a woman named Caroline Voss who looks exactly like Elise without the expensive styling. Before Caroline, there's Nina Bell. Same face. Same birth date shifted by paperwork. Each identity overlaps with a marriage or engagement to a financially successful older man. Daniel's pulse thudded. What happened to them? Luke swallowed. One died in a house fire in Arizona. One fell from a marina dock in Florida after updating his insurance and beneficiary structure. One survived and divorced her, but lost nearly everything in a guardianship fight after a medication incident. He later sued, but she disappeared before deposition. Daniel let that sink in piece by piece. He had not married the wrong woman. He had been selected by a professional predator. If you like story, press subscribe button and like, comment. From that point on, everything moved faster. Daniel's hospital room became a battlefield disguised as recovery. Naomi coordinated with a private investigator she trusted and a detective in financial crimes who owed her a favor from a previous corporate fraud case. Marta dug through years of vendor records and uncovered a pattern. Ryan's theft began small and became bolder once Elise entered Daniel's life. The timing was almost precise enough to chart. Luke mirrored emails, recovered deleted text threads, and traced a series of encrypted message accounts between Ryan and Elise. They rarely used names. They used phrases. The storm window. The transfer point. When the vote clears. If he resists, delay meds. There were jokes, too. Cruel ones. Ryan calling Daniel the golden retriever with a payroll. Elise calling him the man who thinks loyalty is a business strategy. Those hurt in a way physical pain could not. But hurt had become fuel now. Daniel kept playing the role. He let Elise spoon-feed him concern. He let Ryan explain financial matters in simplified language. He let doctors note mild cognitive inconsistency in charts that Elise eagerly referenced whenever Naomi challenged her authority. And because people reveal the most when they feel superior, he got more. One afternoon, while helping him sign a routine therapy consent form, Elise said sweetly, "See? Much better. Soon you'll be able to sign all sorts of things again." Daniel let his hand shake. Did something happen with the company?" Her eyes lit with practiced sadness. "There are just some temporary issues. Ryan's helping. We may need to restructure a few things to protect you." "Protect me from what?" She stroked his arm. "Stress." Another evening, Ryan stopped by after visiting hours, assuming Daniel was too exhausted to notice details. He sat by the bed and talked softly while checking his phone. "You know," Ryan said, "if you had just let me run more of the expansion, none of this would have been necessary." Daniel's breathing remained even. Ryan laughed under his breath. "Not that you can hear me, but still. You made everything harder than it needed to be. Every contract triple-checked, every vendor audited, every payment questioned. That's no way to let a man breathe." He stood. "But don't worry. I'll take good care of what you built." The recorder caught every syllable. By the end of Daniel's second week in the hospital, Naomi had blocked Elise's attempt to extend temporary authority over his finances. She did it quietly, using Daniel's improving status and inconsistencies in the submitted documents as leverage. Elise was furious, but hid it under concern, which meant she and Ryan needed another path. That path arrived in the form of Daniel's discharge. Dr. Patel announced he was stable enough to continue recovery at home, with outpatient therapy and supervised medication. Elise responded like a loving wife, thrilled to bring her husband home. Naomi responded like an attorney smelling gasoline. "No unsupervised medication changes," she said firmly. "No new legal documents, and I want full copies of his discharge plan." Elise smiled. "Of course." Daniel watched both women and knew something bad was coming. At home, Danger wore softer clothes. The Mercer house sat in a quiet neighborhood, lined with live oaks and clean sidewalks. It had once felt like the first place Daniel ever earned with peace, not panic. Now every room looked staged. Elise had moved him into the downstairs guest suite so he wouldn't have to manage stairs. Too thoughtful, too controlled. His phone charging station was gone. His study door was locked. The kitchen medication drawer had a new code. Luke had prepared for that. A tiny backup phone sat taped beneath the guest room nightstand. Another recorder hid in a lamp base. A motion-triggered camera the size of a shirt button watched the room from inside an air vent. Daniel pretended not to notice any of it. The first night home, Elise sat beside his bed with a glass of water and a paper cup of pills. "These will help you sleep," she said. Daniel looked at them slowly. "All of them?" "Doctor's orders." He smiled faintly, took them into his hand, lifted the water, and made a show of swallowing. He waited until she kissed his forehead and left. Then he spat the pills into a tissue. Luke had already confirmed one of the tablets did not match the discharge prescription. When Daniel texted him the imprint code, Luke responded in under a minute. "Powerful sedative, not prescribed." Daniel stared at the message for a long time. Elise was already adapting. If legal control stalled, chemical control would do. The next day, Ryan came over with flowers and a leather folder. "Nothing major," he said, settling into a chair near Daniel's bed. "Just some authorization forms so payroll and claims processing can keep moving. Routine stuff." Daniel let his gaze drift across the room as though focusing cost him effort. "Naomi said not to sign anything without her." Ryan's smile tightened. "Your sister is making simple things complicated." Elise stood in the doorway, arms folded, looking patient. "It's okay, Daniel," she said. "We can review them later when you're less tired." That evening, after both of them thought he was asleep, Daniel heard them arguing in the kitchen. The recorder under the lamp caught everything. "Ryan, this is taking too long." Elise, "Then stop panicking." Ryan, "He's improving." Elise, "Not enough." Ryan, "Naomi's in the way." Elise, "Then we remove the problem we can remove." Silence. Ryan's voice dropped. "You mean Daniel?" Elise answered so calmly it was worse than yelling. "I mean the timeline. If he takes a turn at home, it's tragic. If he dies in a hospital under review, it's messy." Ryan cursed under his breath. Then Elise spoke the words that hardened something final inside Daniel. "You knew what this was when you got in bed with me." Daniel stayed in bed until their footsteps faded. Then he reached under the nightstand, pulled out the hidden phone, and sent one message to the group thread Naomi had created under a false name. "Tomorrow, full meeting. I want them comfortable." The trap they built afterward was Daniel's design, but it took all of them to make it work. Naomi prepared the legal framework, emergency injunctions, fraud claims, evidence packages sealed and ready. She coordinated quietly with law enforcement so no one moved too early. Luke organized the digital evidence, deleted texts, access logs, location data, altered medication records, financial transfers, and a backup from Ryan's laptop proving he had created false vendors tied to accounts he secretly controlled. Marta assembled years of internal documents, invoice histories, signature comparisons, approval chains, and board communications showing Ryan's slow effort to undermine Daniel's credibility while making himself appear indispensable. And Daniel did the hardest part. He acted weaker than he was. For 4 more days, he let Elise think exhaustion still owned him. He let Ryan think greed was winning. He asked small, seemingly helpless questions. "Is the company okay? Did insurance pay for the warehouse? Will the board have to replace me?" Every answer they gave revealed more than they intended. Ryan admitted the board needed stable leadership. Elise suggested Daniel might want to step back permanently for health. They brought papers twice more. They discussed in whispers what kind of doctor's statement might support a competence challenge. On the 5th day, Daniel made his move. At breakfast, he looked at Elise with tired eyes and said, "Maybe we should do it." She paused over the coffee pot. "Do what, sweetheart?" "The papers, the meeting, whatever Ryan needs. I don't want to fight anymore. I'm tired." For a fraction of a second, triumph flashed naked across her face. Then it vanished behind softness. "Oh, Daniel, if you're sure." He nodded. "Today, get everyone here." By noon, the house was ready. Elise wore cream silk and concern. Ryan arrived with a briefcase and false sympathy. Naomi came carrying her legal portfolio like she had been reluctantly included. Marta came with operational files. Luke came pretending he had been forced to pause work calls. And at exactly 1:15, 2 plainclothes detectives parked half a block away and waited for Daniel's signal. Everyone gathered in the dining room. Sunlight spilled across the polished table. Family photos stared down from the wall. The whole room looked painfully normal. Ryan laid out the documents first. "These are streamlined," he said. Just temporary transfer authority, operational continuity authorization, and a board recommendation packet. Once you sign, I can protect the company and Elise can manage household and medical decisions without interference. Daniel sat at the head of the table, shoulders slightly slumped, one hand still bandaged. He picked up the pen slowly. Elise moved beside him. "Take your time." Naomi watched silently. Marta's face gave nothing away. Luke scrolled on his phone like a bored man waiting for paperwork to end. Daniel flipped the top page, then the next, then another. He let the silence stretch until Ryan shifted in his chair. Finally, Daniel looked up and said, in a steady voice with no confusion in it at all, "Before I sign anything, I think we should clear up a few details." The room went still. Elise blinked once. Ryan's hand froze over his folder. Daniel set the pen down. "I'm especially interested," he said, "in how a temporary continuity packet turned into a full transfer of voting control, access to insurance reserves, unilateral property authority, and a clause that allows liquidation of my personal holdings under medical incapacity." Ryan found his voice first. "Daniel, you're misreading." "No," Daniel said calmly. "I'm reading perfectly." Elise stepped in fast. "Honey, maybe this is too much for you right now. Don't call me honey unless you want the detectives to hear it too." Her face changed. Not much, but enough. The mask slipped by a millimeter, and once seen, it could not be unseen. Ryan leaned back. "What detectives?" Daniel nodded toward the front window, where two unmarked cars had just pulled up. "I invited them." Nobody spoke. Daniel opened the first folder in front of him and slid several documents across the table. "Let's start with internal fraud. Marta?" Marta opened her binder with surgical precision. "Over the past 14 months, she said, 6 shell vendors received fraudulent payments from Mercer Restoration Group totaling $648,000. Each vendor was approved through authorization chains manipulated by Ryan Sloan. Bank routing confirms the funds ultimately landed in accounts under entities he controlled." Ryan pushed back from the table. "This is insane." Luke spoke without looking up from his phone. "Sit down. You'll want to hear the digital part." Ryan stared at him. Luke finally lifted his eyes and smiled without warmth. "The fake maintenance account used to trigger the warehouse suppression alert was created from your company laptop. The login originated from your apartment. The after-hours access to the warehouse the night before the explosion came from your badge ID. Deleted, but not deleted enough." Color drained from Ryan's face. Elise recovered faster. "This is absurd," she snapped. "Daniel, you're confused and paranoid. Naomi, stop this." Naomi slid a document across the table. "Forgery analysis," she said. "Your signature on Daniel's trust amendment doesn't match his known writing samples. Neither does the insurance rider increasing your accidental death payout." Elise's jaw tightened. "I never touched his signatures." Daniel looked at her. "You filled out the insurance forms yourself." The words landed like a slap. Ryan turned toward her slowly. Elise said nothing. That was when Daniel reached into his pocket, took out the backup phone, and pressed play. Her voice filled the dining room. Cold, quiet, unmistakable. "2 more days, Daniel. That's all I need. If your next scan looks bad, the temporary control order becomes permanent, and everything rolls to me." Nobody moved. The recording continued. Her call with Ryan, her complaints about his recovery, her threat about a turn at home. Ryan's own voice talking about the blast should have finished it. By the time the audio ended, even the air in the room felt different. The detectives stepped inside then, guided by Naomi's earlier signal. One of them, Detective Alvarez, laid his badge on the table. "Mr. Sloan, Mrs. Mercer, don't leave." Ryan stood so suddenly the chair scraped backward hard enough to tip.
"I didn't touch that warehouse," he shouted, pointing at Elise. "This was her idea. She said we just needed to scare him into stepping down." Elise turned on him with venom so fast it was almost impressive.
"Oh, now you want to grow a conscience?" Daniel watched them both and felt something strange settle in his chest. Not peace, not yet, but the first outline of it. "Actually," he said, opening a second folder, "we're still not done." Everyone looked at him. Even the detectives paused. Daniel slid another set of papers toward Detective Alvarez. "My wife's name isn't Elise Mercer. Or at least, it wasn't always." Luke rotated a tablet screen so the detective could see. 3 identity records, 3 marriage licenses, 3 men. 1 dead in Arizona, 1 dead in Florida, 1 financially destroyed in Nevada. Same face, same pattern, different name each time. Elise stared at the screen, and for the first time since Daniel had known her, she looked genuinely cornered. Naomi's voice was razor sharp. "She targets financially successful men during periods of emotional vulnerability, inserts herself into estate and insurance structures, isolates them, manipulates legal authority, and profits from incapacity or death. We believe Daniel Mercer is not her first victim. He is simply the first one who lived long enough to expose her." Detective Alvarez looked from the records to Elise. "Ma'am, is there anything you want to explain?" Elise laughed once, but the sound was cracked now. "You think any of this proves attempted murder?" Luke answered before anyone else could. "The altered medication does." He held up a sealed evidence bag. "Pills recovered from Daniel's room. Not prescribed. Sedative concentration capable of suppressing respiration in someone with his injuries if combined with pain medication." Ryan looked horrified. "You told me those were just to keep him calm." Elise whipped toward him. "Shut up." Bad choice. Very bad choice. Because Detective Alvarez smiled the way cops smile when stupid people finally stop needing help incriminating themselves. Ryan saw it too late. His shoulders sagged. "I never wanted him dead," he muttered. "Not like that." Daniel looked at the man he had once called brother. "You helped blow up a warehouse with me inside it." Ryan looked away. "I thought you'd be late," he whispered. "I thought the timer would go before you walked in." That silence afterward felt endless. Then handcuffs came out. Detective Alvarez moved to Ryan first. "Ryan Sloan, you are being detained on suspicion of fraud, conspiracy, evidence tampering, and attempted homicide pending formal charges." Ryan did not resist. He looked broken in the small, pathetic way greedy men often do once consequences become real. Elise was different. When the second detective stepped toward her, she stood slowly, smoothing the front of her blouse as if she were still in control of the room. "You're making a mistake," she said evenly. "He was concussed, drugged, emotional. All of this can be challenged." Daniel met her eyes. "You're right," he said. "It can." Then he slid one final envelope across the table. Inside was a notarized statement from the warehouse technician Leo, who had been bribed to report the false alarm and keep Daniel near the suppression room. Luke had found the payment trail. Naomi had found the pressure. The detectives had found the rest. Elise understood immediately. For the first time, her composure shattered. "You stupid, sentimental idiot," she hissed at Daniel. "You really think you won because you made it to a dining room with paperwork?" Daniel stood. Not quickly, not dramatically, just firmly. His injuries still pulled at his side. Pain still lived in his chest. But he stood on his own feet and watched the realization hit her all at once. He had never been hers. Not in the way she thought. "You lost," he said quietly. "The second you mistook kindness for weakness." She lunged then, not at him, but toward the counter where her purse sat. Maybe there was a phone inside. Maybe pills. Maybe something desperate and stupid. She never made it. Detective Mercer, no relation despite the name, caught her arm, twisted it behind her back, and brought the cuffs closed with a hard metallic click. Elise struggled once, then stilled. As they walked her toward the front door, she turned her head and looked at Daniel over her shoulder. All the warmth was gone, all the polish, all the careful elegance. What remained was appetite in human form. "This won't be the end of me," she said. Daniel believed her. Predators rarely think the first cage is permanent. But that no longer mattered, because this was the end of her being a hidden one. After the arrests, the house became quiet in a way Daniel had never heard before. Not peaceful, echoing. The detective stayed for hours. Statements were taken, devices were cataloged, evidence was boxed. Naomi handled the legal choreography with the icy efficiency of someone who had spent 2 weeks preparing for every possible objection. Marta left only after confirming emergency corporate controls had been restored, and Ryan's system access terminated across every account. She stood in the kitchen holding a mug of coffee gone cold and looked at Daniel with tired eyes. "You know," she said, "I always thought your biggest flaw as a boss was that you gave people too many chances." Daniel gave a humorless half-smile. "Still true, maybe, but not today." Luke stayed later than everyone else. They sat in the living room amid open files, discarded evidence tags, and the remains of a meal nobody had really eaten. "You doing okay?" Luke asked. Daniel considered lying and decided not to. "No," Luke nodded. "Yeah, that makes sense." Daniel looked toward the front door through which Elise had been led away. "I keep replaying everything. Conversations, trips, birthdays, nights she said she loved me. I'm trying to figure out what was real." Luke leaned back and folded his arms. Maybe some of it was useful to her. Maybe none of it was real. But that doesn't change what was real about you. Daniel was quiet. Luke went on. "You loved honestly. You trusted honestly. That's not stupidity. That's just expensive when it lands on the wrong person." For the first time in days, Daniel laughed. It hurt, but it was real. The criminal case unfolded over the following months like a long, ugly storm. Ryan took a plea deal once faced with the financial records, access logs, and recorded statements. He admitted to embezzlement, conspiracy, document fraud, and participation in the warehouse scheme, though he tried until the end to frame himself as manipulated rather than willing. The court was not impressed. Elise fought everything. She contested the recordings. She claimed Daniel's injuries made him unreliable. She insisted the forged documents were misunderstandings. She denied the previous identities until Luke's digital trail, Naomi's subpoenas, and out-of-state investigators connected beneficiary records, travel overlaps, and fraudulent filings across multiple jurisdictions. Then another man came forward. And another. One had survived an overdose he once believed was accidental. One had lost a marina business during a coerced recovery period after a fall that now looked suspicious. Both recognized her from the news, though by different names. Patterns became history. History became indictment. By the time the full case reached court, Elise Mercer, or Caroline Voss, or Nina Bell, depending on which chapter of her life the records showed, was facing more than Daniel's evidence. She was facing the weight of a method finally seen clearly. Daniel did not attend every hearing. He attended the important one, the day she was convicted. Not because he needed to watch her lose, but because he wanted to be there when the truth stopped being private pain and became public fact. When the judge read the findings, fraud, identity manipulation, document forgery, conspiracy in the warehouse explosion, unlawful administration of medication, attempted homicide, Elise showed no emotion at first. Then she looked back into the gallery and found Daniel, and smiled. A thin, strange smile. A final attempt to say, "I still reach you." Daniel did not react, because healing, he had learned, was not always dramatic. Sometimes it was as simple as refusing to carry someone else's poison one more step than necessary. A year later, Houston got hit with the kind of spring flooding that turned intersections into rivers overnight. Mercer restoration crews moved out before sunrise in 23 trucks. Pumps, generators, drying units, demolition gear. Daniel stood in the command yard wearing boots, a navy work shirt with his company name over the pocket, and the scar along his jaw faint but permanent in the early light. He had rebuilt a lot in 12 months. Not everything. Some things did not come back the same. He still woke sometimes with the feeling of smoke in his throat. Still checked medication labels twice. Still felt a flicker of cold whenever perfume too close to jasmine passed by in a restaurant or elevator. But the company stood. Stronger, cleaner, more honest than before. Ryan's damage had been repaired. The fraud losses had been recovered in part through asset seizure and insurance litigation. Marta had become CFO officially after years of doing the work without the title. Naomi now sat on the company's oversight board whether Daniel liked it or not, which she found hilarious. Luke had hardened Mercer's entire digital infrastructure so thoroughly that he once described hacking into Daniel's systems as less likely than teaching Dad's old toolbox to sing. And Daniel, piece by piece, had returned to himself. Not the old self. A wiser one. A sadder one. A stronger one. He had also started something new. The Mercer Safe Recovery Initiative began quietly, funded at first by Daniel's own money and later by court-awarded restitution. It provided legal and forensic support to families navigating suspicious incapacity claims, exploitative relationships, forged estate changes, and financial predation during medical crises. Because once you learn how easily a hospital bed can become a hunting ground for the wrong people, you stop believing justice should depend on luck. On a humid Friday evening, Daniel stood outside a newly restored community center on the north side, watching local families carry folding chairs inside for the reopening event. The building had flooded twice in 5 years. Mercer crews rebuilt it both times. Naomi walked up beside him, heels somehow surviving gravel without complaint. "You're doing that thing again," she said. "What thing?" "The staring into the middle distance like a man in a commercial thing." Daniel smiled. "Maybe I like dramatic pauses now." She handed him a sealed envelope. "What's this?" "Parole opposition notice," she said. "Not for her, for Ryan. He thought early cooperation would make everyone sentimental." Daniel took the envelope, then handed it back, unopened. "You handle it." Naomi lifted a brow. "Not curious?" "No." And he meant it. That surprised him a little. There had been a time when he wanted to know everything, every filing, every consequence, every miserable detail of how the two people who betrayed him were living now. But obsession is just another way of staying trapped in the room where somebody tried to break you. Daniel was done living there. The evening crowd thickened. A little girl ran past carrying a paper plate twice the size of her face. Somewhere inside, a sound system squealed and then corrected itself. Someone laughed too loudly. The scent of barbecue and rain hung in the air. Marta joined them, checking messages on one phone and weather alerts on another. "3 crews are already moving west," she said. "Baytown got hit harder than expected." Daniel nodded. "Open the overflow yard. Pull the portable units from storage." "Already done." "Of course it is." Marta smirked. "One day you'll stop sounding surprised when competent people work for you." Luke arrived last, late as always, carrying a box of donated tablets for the center's after-school program and looking offended by humidity. "I brought technology," he announced. "Please admire me." Naomi rolled her eyes. We do not. Luke looked at Daniel. We do a little, right? A little, Daniel admitted. They stood together outside the building as the sun lowered over the neighborhood, washing the street in gold. For a moment, Daniel thought about the ICU again. The helplessness, the fury, the whisper in the dark. 2 more days, Daniel. That's all I need. It amazed him now that a sentence meant to finish him had become the first crack in the whole lie. If she had stayed silent, maybe he would have woken slower. Maybe he would have trusted longer. Maybe he would have signed what they put in front of him. Maybe he would have gone from injured to buried while everyone called it tragic. Instead, she spoke, and Daniel listened. That, more than anything, had saved him. Not strength, not luck, not revenge. Attention. The same thing that built his company had saved his life. Notice the details. Trust the patterns. Do not ignore what doesn't fit. The community center lights flickered on. Inside, kids shouted. Music started. Somebody called Daniel's name and waved him in. He took one step, then another. Not toward the past, not toward the courtroom, not toward the woman who had tried to turn his life into an asset transfer. Toward people, toward work, toward whatever came next. And that, he thought, was a far better ending than revenge alone. If you like Story Press, subscribe button and like, comment.